Hi, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, as the case may be, depending upon your time zone. Hey, this is Ted Spence. I'm the director of the Avatax API team. We have an interesting webinar for you today. We're talking today with Ron Paul, who's a manager of Avalara's content team. And we're going to talk a bit about what tax codes are. What I'd like to start with today is I'd like to show everyone this is the Avalara site that publishes a list of all of our tax codes. Well, just to give everyone a little bit of context, Avalara uses tax codes to represent information about what a product is, what type of product is, and we use this to connect with our content to identify what a product is and how it's taxed in different jurisdictions. Ron Paul is a specialist that I've worked with for quite a few years now. Ron, would you say hello to everyone?
Hi, everybody.
Hey, so Ron has actually been one of Avalara's key content people for a very long time, and he's been responsible for doing a lot of interesting investigative work to look at the way that tax authorities write their laws, the way that they determine their rates, and the way that they put everything together to come up with the final tax that you should be charged. And so the overall goal here is that you should be able to use tax codes to properly represent your products. And when that happens, the developer guide will show you how to specify your transactions, how to identify product taxability, and how to make use of these tax codes to get the right tax in every jurisdiction. So this is part of the Developer Office Hours series. So we'd like to start off by mentioning that we have this webinar every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Pacific time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we're inviting a series of guests from within Avalara who are specialists in different part of tax. And I've very much liked working with Ron because he's always been directly hands-on with the exciting types of research we do. Ron, can I ask, what jurisdictions are you looking at nowadays?
Well, we're primarily focused on the United States and parts of Canada within my group. My group specifically is the Content Design and Delivery group. So more than jurisdictions, what we're really looking at are the less standard types of tax that go through, the more complex things. For example, just recently, we did for a large client electronic waste in Canada and the US for computer parts. So one of the things that was very interesting about that is it's a multi-tiered tax. You have both the regular or tangible personal property piece that you would associate with almost any good and service, but then you also had a fee based on various parameters that changed based on which province you were in or based on whether you were actually in Canada or the United States.
So Ron, just out of curiosity, my wife got annoyed with my TV system recently, and she asked me to upgrade it and make the sound on it a little bit better. So I had to pay an e-waste disposal fee for my television. Is that what we're talking about here?
That's correct. That's correct. And depending on where you're looking at, it gets a little complex because it could be done by the size of the screen or even the components in the screen.
Really?
So we had to make some attributes to pass along with that tax code to make it a little bit easier for folks to get to just the right answer.
Gotcha. So if I'm following you correctly, then what you're saying is that tax codes will give you a lot of basic information about a product. But when you're getting more detailed, that's where you have to work with Avalara to work with your account manager and add parameters to customize these things. Is that right?
That's definitely one path you can go down. It really depends on what your system will be able to take, and we highly recommend the ability to use parameters because it makes it much easier on the retailer to be able to specify their products and get to the right answer. The other option, of course, is to create additional tax codes for them to pick from. But by far, the most efficient way is to look at parameters.
Okay. So can I just contrast that? I wrote a blog a while ago with the team that's handling cross-border taxes, and we used parameters for that too. So what we did is we added for each line a parameter that would represent the international harmonized tariff code, which is a feature used for cross-border taxes. Is that basically what it would be like for e-waste?
It could be. It could be very similar to that, although we're actually going to use that parameter to be able to change some of the back-end taxability and rate structure as well. So, for example, if you're looking at a peripheral like a mouse in Saskatchewan, for example, you're going to get your basic taxability line, but you're also going to see that in Saskatchewan, they charge 50 cents per mouse sold as an e-waste fee. In other areas, yeah, in a more advanced way, what you would be looking at is screen sizes. So there's a different. I'm sorry?
Nowadays, I figure I pay maybe $4 or $5 for a mouse. That 50-cent tax, that's higher than I would have expected.
Yeah. For screens, they actually do it by the size of the screen, and there's a different fee structure based on your sizes, and there's a range in there. So in that case, we would want to actually have the parameter enter the screen size for it, and it would automatically change the fee structure to the correct one based on that screen size.
Cool. So just before I go to open questions, this is office hours. We do want to give everyone who's on the call a chance to ask questions and talk to us. But actually, Ron, I'd love to follow up with you. Could I work with you at some point, write some documentation and example API calls for this e-waste feature?
Absolutely.
I know we've implemented it in some custom integrations for people, but I'd love to put a blog post on the developer site and just help everyone else learn how to use it.
Yeah, great. I'd love to do that.
Cool. So as a reminder, everyone, this is office hours. We ask for you to talk to us, ask us questions. So if you go into the chat window of your webinar, please put a question in or ask your question. And we'd love to have myself, Ted Spence, Director of the API team, or Ron Paul, from the content team. We'd love to just answer your questions and talk a bit about Avatax and how we can be of help. So I got a question recently, Ron, which was about something really interesting that was called drayage. Have you ever heard of drayage?
I haven't. Can you tell me a little more about it?
So I believe the person who looked this up, drayage is short distance transport. And I think it has an implication that it may be involved in I think originally drayage had something to do with canals or horse. I don't remember the exact history of the term, but it sounds like this is a specific type of shipping. Do you know? Are there more than one type of shipping?
There's a plethora of different types of shipping tax, and there's a lot of different variables involved in it. We have handled the most common cases which are available. Typically under your FR code base, but absolutely, whether it's an intrastate, interstate, whether the places you're dealing with have sourcing based on location, on destination, if it's mixed, if it's international, all of these considerations have to be looked at, as well as sometimes the mode of transport for that shipping as well.
So let's imagine that I'm shipping something via horse and buggy. Now, I don't know exactly how I would come up with that idea, but this is the Avalara tax code site. How would I go about finding the best freight code for this?
Well, I think the first thing you would really want to do is just look at the FR code, which is the standard code that we would typically look at, and what you're going to use the FR, I believe it's 10100.
Okay, 10100.
Yeah, which is by a company vehicle. So the first thing you'd want to know is that horse and buggy actually owned by the company that we're looking at. The next thing you would want to do is look at the basic. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Ask, what's the alternative to it being owned by the company? Is it UPS, where it would be owned by someone else?
Correct, or one of the standard shippers, and that's the most common scenario that most of our customers experience, which is covered by the FR code. The FTAR code is typically your default code that's going to come up every time. It's typically built into your ERP as the default code, and it covers most of our normal type of shipping scenarios, your UPS, your USPS, your FedEx, DHL, all of those type of delivery methods. And so we have rules that are based on that, where we even have freight follows rules built in, or tax depends, some people call it, where the freight can be, the taxable nature of the freight charge can be dependent on whether or not the products or services being shipped are taxable as well. And so that encompasses almost all of our normal shipping methods. And then we have a slew of different styles of freight and shipping methods to meet your specific needs. I would say in this case with that, I would probably be looking at the FR code first, unless I owned the horse and buggy that I was transporting with, and then I would probably look to the FR 0100 code.
So I'm guessing that I got on this whole horse and buggy example just because of the Wikipedia page for drayage had a picture of a horse and buggy on it. But let's say Harrison Ford decides to create a sequel to the movie Witness, where he goes off and hides in an Amish farm. If he then orders some milk and his neighbor delivers it on a horse and buggy, would that be shipping by company vehicle, common carrier, or what's a non-common carrier?
Non-common carrier can cover a dearth of different things, and I think that's probably more than we have time to cover today.
All right. Well, I can tell that the scenario of ordering milk via Amish buggy is probably not going to come up that often. But you can clearly see that there's the Avatax tax codes have support for company vehicles, common carriers, and a couple of other things. Wow, look at all this stuff. There's so many different options. Do you guys have to research all of them?
Yes, we do, and we have to not just research them, but we have to continually research them. As things change from states and locals and PIFs and TIFs and all of those various little smaller bifurcations of states and areas. So each one of those little jurisdictions could potentially make a change to this, and we're researching them all every single day.
Gotcha. So actually, I had one other question from a customer here, which is. If you get a ruling from a tax auditor that says that they consider it, a specific thing, what happens when a different auditor in a different state comes up with a different ruling? How do you handle that?
Okay, so each jurisdiction is handled separately.
Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you had a follow-up. So each jurisdiction is handled separately. Although I will tell you that the auditor is typically not the final word. Typically, the final word is the statute. So as time has progressed and states have done different things, sometimes they're even outsourcing their auditing. So there is a level of uncertainty with any type of an auditor decision, which typically there's a conversation around it. And I'll give you a pretty good example. So a lot of times in jurisdictions like where I actually live in an unincorporated county. But if you were to mail me something, you would put a city address on it, even though I don't live in that city. And that's common across the United States. We've run into a lot of different scenarios where an auditor will say, well, you didn't pay your city tax, because the auditor may not be specifically aware of where those boundary lines lie. So even though we have it correct, the auditor may say, oh, well, this is wrong. And then we have to have a discussion with them and explain to them that, no, actually, this is in an unincorporated city and you can't use a postal address to determine where the jurisdictions in that vertical jurisdiction stack for that tax region exist. So the answer is always to go back to the statute and read it directly.
Well, and I'd also like to put a plug in here. I'd like to suggest this is an excellent opportunity for customers to engage with Avalara's professional services division. We have a fantastic group of people, including a lot of former auditors, and you can find them by going under resources, developer support, And you can click here to go directly to the professional services team. Now, these people here have talked to auditors, they have been auditors, they have helped out customers who are in audit circumstances. So if you as a customer ever get into a situation where two auditors are telling you to do something different, Avalara can be a resource. We can help you attempt to bridge the gap between one auditor and another. And I'd just like to mention that this option is always available. You're always welcome to talk to them, and they'll be able to talk to you about what types of help they can give. So Ron, I had a follow-up about this, which was specifically that, and this one I think I can take. The challenge is that this particular customer, oops, tax code. This particular customer said that they had a software download that was considered a download in one state, and it's considered a subscription in another state. So actually, I have an answer for this. There is a feature under development right now in the API team, which is called complex custom rules that will allow you to make changes dynamically to your tax based upon complex business logic like this. We're currently in a beta phase for this feature, and we're working on it with a number of select customers. So if you happen to have a need for complex rules that change your transactions tax codes, reach out to your account manager, and your account manager will contact me and see if I can fit you into the beta program for this custom rules feature. And that custom rules feature allows you to say, in state New York, use this tax code, but in state California, use this tax code. Ron, do you have another question over there?
No, I was going to ask that you would share that with me as well. One of the things that my team's looking at very seriously is a way to take a tax code and have it represent a particular thing, but then use attributes to be able to change what the back-end logic of that thing is. So in that example that we just had, that might be something that we could handle with attribution.
Yeah, actually, the customer who's using this via beta, obviously I can't mention customer names, but sure, they're specifically using it for the e-waste product. So okay, what they've done is they've given us a spreadsheet that lists all of their products and all of their screen sizes. So they have 50 different television SKUs, and for each television SKU, they've given us the screen size. And because they are using an off-the-shelf connector, they can't go back and add that parameter to their connector without waiting for it to be built, tested, validated, certified, all that sort of stuff. So they're working with us to use advanced rules to apply those parameters dynamically. Okay, understood. That's exciting. Yeah, I think that'll actually be fun. And then again, I like working with you, so what can I say? Do we have any other questions on the line? All right, I see a question here, which is, are there tax codes for automobiles? That's a good question. Ron, do you know the answer to that one? In what aspect? There's certainly, we have a generic code or a default code that is represented by P and then 7 zeros, which is for personal tangible property. Okay. So anything that would fall under personal tangible property, that could be used for. As far as direct auto sales, I do not believe we have a code base right now for that. We haven't really been asked for it. We certainly could craft something of that nature. The rental space gets a little more complex with short-term and long-term rental, but we do have some codes that can be utilized for that. But I would say as far as for specifically walking into a dealership and buying a car today, there are aspects of that tax that we would absolutely be able to do, but I don't think we have a comprehensive multi-tax setup just yet. So that's interesting to me. So I noticed right here that I did a quick search and I noticed that there's child car seats. So out of curiosity, you don't have cars as a tax code, but you do have child car seats. Would that be because you found car seats in a law somewhere? We certainly would have, yes. And it probably, just for a little bit of oversharing, probably came from when we were looking at child clothing. Oh, boy.
Laws have a tendency to kind of be bundled together in the statute so that you can see them. Um,
Mhm.
but also, it really is dependent upon what our clients are requesting.
Hmm.
So we haven't had a lot of car dealerships, come to us and say, "Can you handle?" At least not to my knowledge. That's probably more of a business development type of question to ask whether they've come or not. However, we do have a number of retail stores, and based on those retail stores, that would be a product that they would be very interested in. So we would take the time to go out and research that for them and make sure they got it right.
So that's a good point here. What I would emphasize to everyone who's on the call is if you're interested in a particular market space, talk to your salesperson before you sign a deal, talk to your customer account manager after you've signed a deal, and those people will be able to contact people like Ron Paul and myself, and they'll be able to suggest to us that we double check any particular laws or double check any particular regulations. Um, it could be that in some states, certain types of things are not taxable. It could be that they have slightly different tax rates or anything like that.
Mhm. Yeah, I have a real good example of that. Just very recently, we've had a couple of clients reach out to us about the fees associated with plastic bags that are given typically for free to customers.
Yeah.
And so we went ahead and did the research for the states that required that, and that's being launched, I believe, this month.
Well, apparently you found urinal bags somewhere. That's kind of interesting. I don't know how that one came up on a search here in a webinar. Do you think we can just edit that out in the post-processing? Maybe skip that little section there?
Well, I think for clients that need that kind of thing, it's pretty important for it to be descriptive enough. Understood.
Well, apparently I wouldn't have chosen this search offhand because I run across catheters and a variety of other medical supplies. So I'm just going to clear this search and we can continue on. How about? But please finish telling us about plastic bags.
Oh, well, what was very interesting for us is that Chicago just introduced some legislation with a standard fee for plastic bags in their grocery stores. And then based on that, we went out and did a little bit of additional research and found out, well, this matters some other places. And so, that one customer making that request actually made it a whole new product available for all of our customers in the places where they sell. And that happens quite a bit. That we'll look at one of those things. Another great example is that Oregon is instituting a fee on all bikes within the state. And based on that, we went out and we did some research and found out that Colorado Springs also has a tax on bikes or a fee on bikes that has been existent for some time, but no one had ever asked for before. So we went ahead and included that in the bike fees as well to make sure that any customer selling, no matter where they were selling to, would have all of the correct information. And that is a lot of times the way that we will structure our research is based on direct customer need as well as legislation changes.
Gotcha. So I have an interesting question here about bags. I'm pretty sure the bag fees are, at least here in Seattle, they're per unit, right? Rather than percentage based?
That is correct. It is a true fee. So it's quantity based rather than ad valorem.
Okay. So do you happen to know by chance what the tax code is for these plastic bags?
Again, it has not come through yet. I believe it's being launched this month.
Oh, that's fantastic. So actually, that would be a great follow-up article as well. Because what you can do on the developer site is you can go up here to the API reference, and you can try out transactions with a variety of different tax codes. So right here on the API reference, there's a page for create transaction. And when you use the create transaction API, in here amongst our documentation, there's a feature called try it now. So I'm going to go ahead and try something out now. And let's pick an interesting tax code. Ron, do you have like any tax code that you think has some curious behavior that some people would like to see on this webinar?
Oh yeah, I wish I'd known this ahead of time. I would have had a couple prepared for you real quick. Give me just a moment, if you would, and I will find you maybe an e-waste tax code.
Okay. So one of the things that I always like is I can tell the story about some interesting tax behavior in Tennessee and Florida, where you have threshold-based taxes. There's situations like in Connecticut, if you're leasing something or if things hit the luxury rate, there's different tax behavior. But what you can do is you can use this tax code field from the tax code search page. So if you search for something and you say, well, I want to use vitamins. So I'm going to take this tax code for vitamins and I'm going to put it here into the tax code field of my API call. I can submit it and then I'll get tax calculation for this, which turns out to be exempt in this particular case. Well, it could be that what I'm using is I'm using a customer that does not have Nexus in this jurisdiction. It could be that this customer is configured in such a way as to make this thing exempt. But you know, when you call Avatax, we are actually looking at your account, at your configuration, and we are calculating the correct tax for your circumstances. I do want to mention, Ron, could you give everyone a quick explanation of what the Quill decision is in law? This is something that's being discussed right now, and it's coming up for the review in the Supreme Court. Sorry, could you give a quick rundown of what that is?
So you're talking about Quill versus Penn, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so Quill versus Penn is mostly, and I'm not a lawyer, so bear with me.
Okay.
But Quill versus Penn talks about whether or not you have to have a physical brick and mortar in a particular location to establish Nexus. And this is obviously a hotly contested item right now based on, you know, the advent of internet selling. So what exactly establishes Nexus? And I think the best example to look at to see kind of how the country's leading is actually not Quill versus Penn, but Amazon versus the state of New York.
Gotcha.
So because it's a little bit more modern and it has a little bit better context. So effectively, in my very layman's words, what happened in New York is that they looked around and said, we're losing a lot of tax revenue. I'm talking about the New York Department of Revenue here. And so that you start to look and say, well, where are we losing this revenue at? Because people are still buying goods and services. And it was determined that a lot of it was being lost to buying goods over the internet where tax was not being collected and remitted. And so they went and kind of analyzed it and said, well, where, you know, how do we attack this? Because although there is a requirement for each individual to collect and remit a use tax if they have not been charged tax, it's very difficult to enforce that, and there's not the right type of technology out there to enforce that on an individual basis. So instead, they decided that they would go towards some of the larger sellers that were involved in this activity. In this case, you know, Amazon's the easiest target because it was probably the largest over all the other online sellers. And
right.
So
let me just interject here that the concept of declaring Nexus in jurisdictions, we have a page in Avatax that says manage where you collect tax. And you could find it by going to the settings and then clicking manage where you collect and remit tax. And you can then declare individual jurisdictions. But what will happen is if you do not declare that you collect tax in certain jurisdictions, then your create transaction call will look like this. It will look like, hey, the whole thing is exempt.
Right.
So we're actually running a little bit low on time. Let's just take a quick pause and see if we've got any other questions on the line. I'd like to also just say thanks to Jeff Meisner. Jeff Meisner has been facilitating these calls. He's been sitting here quietly and patiently in the background, handling the behind-the-scenes work that makes this all possible. So thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks, Ted. Yep, we're excited for this new Office Hours with Avatax series. So like Ted said earlier, it's every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. The first 15 minutes focuses on a specific topic, and then if we have the time, we will use the last 15 minutes to ask for the audience to ask any questions they may have about the platform. So please do come every Tuesday if you can, and come prepared with questions. We are eager to help you guys do as much as you can with the platform.
Great, thanks so much. And I'd also like to express much appreciation to Ron Paul. Ron, it's always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you.
So next week we have a developer webinar focused on exemption certificates. So if you're interested in this topic, we'd love to see you. My guest next week will be Bob Maidens, who manages our exemption certificate team. And he's a ton of fun to talk to as well. So thanks very much, everyone. We'll be publishing our calendar for February. And just like we did today, all of our webinars will have a special guest to talk about an interesting topic. And we'd love to see you there. Thanks so much for your time.